We often talk about history as a series of public events. But what if the most significant shifts happened behind locked doors? For decades, the line between a wild conspiracy theory and a documented reality was blurred by those with the most to lose. From the light bulbs in your home to the medicine in your cabinet, the truth was often a commodity that global powers couldn't afford to let escape. Today, we are peeling back the hidden layer of our modern world. These aren't just rumors, they are the proven, documented instances where corporate greed and political silence collided. But how deep does the rabbit hole actually go? Our story begins in a smoke-filled room in Geneva, 1924. Representatives from the world's leading light bulb manufacturers, including giants like General Electric and Osram, met to discuss a problem. Their products were simply too good. At the time, a standard bulb could last 2,500 hours or more. But for the newly formed Phoebus Cartel, durability was the enemy of profit. They didn't just share technology, they conspired to sabotage it. In a move that would define modern consumerism, they mandated that every bulb produced must fail after exactly 1,000 hours. Any company that produced a bulb lasting longer was heavily fined. This was the birth of planned obsolescence, a secret pact that stayed hidden for decades. It's a sobering thought that the very items we rely on were designed to break by a committee of men who feared a product that wouldn't die. But was this just an isolated case of corporate greed? Or was it the blueprint for the entire 20th century? The cartel eventually dissolved during the Second World War, but the philosophy remained. It proved that if you control the technical standards, you control the world's wallet. By the 1950s, the corporate playbook had evolved from manufacturing bulbs to manufacturing doubt. In 1954, the tobacco industry released a full-page advertisement titled, "A Frank Statement to Cigarette Smokers." It promised that the health of the public was their primary concern, and that there was no proof of a link between smoking and lung cancer. But behind the scenes, their own scientists were screaming the opposite. Internal memos, which only came to light decades later, show that industry executives knew cigarettes were addictive and lethal as early as the mid-50s. They didn't just ignore the data, they weaponized it. They created the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, not to find the truth, but to bury it under a mountain of sponsored confusion. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. While their lab reports were filled with warnings about carcinogens, their marketing campaigns were filled with images of doctors and athletes. This campaign of silence lasted nearly half a century. It raises a chilling question: how many lives were the cost of a quarterly profit margin? The industry's internal documents eventually revealed a culture that prioritized the bottom line over the literal breath of their customers. But the truth has a way of leaking out. The breaking point arrived in April 1994. 7 CEOs of the largest tobacco companies, famously dubbed the Seven Dwarves, stood before the United States Congress. One by one, they raised their right hands and swore that they did not believe nicotine was addictive. It was a performance of unified denial that seemed impenetrable. But they didn't know that the walls were already crumbling. A paralegal named Merrill Williams Jr. had spent years secretly copying thousands of pages of internal documents from the law firm representing Brown and Williamson. These papers were the smoking gun. They contained explicit admissions that the industry was, in their own words, in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug. When these documents were leaked to the press and researchers, the industry's 50-year wall of silence shattered. It led to the Master Settlement Agreement of 1998, where tobacco companies were forced to pay $206 billion to cover healthcare costs. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a tectonic shift in public trust. It proved that no matter how much money you spend on PR, a single whistleblower with a photocopier can bring an empire to its knees. But corporate boardrooms weren't the only places where secrets were kept. While corporations were hiding data, state institutions were conducting experiments that defied every ethical standard of the modern age. Perhaps the most harrowing example is the Tuskegee syphilis study. For 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, the United States Public Health Service tracked hundreds of black men in Alabama who had syphilis. The men were told they were being treated for bad blood. In reality, they were given no effective treatment at all. Even when penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, the researchers actively prevented the participants from receiving it. They wanted to watch the disease take its full, devastating course, all the way to the grave. This wasn't a secret kept from the government. It was the government's own project. For decades, papers were published in peer-reviewed medical journals as if this were normal science. The silence was absolute until 1972, when Peter Buckstone, a whistleblower within the service, leaked the story to the Associated Press. The public was horrified. The legacy of this betrayal created a deep-seated distrust of medical institutions that persists to this day. But was Tuskegee an isolated tragedy of the mid-century? The horrors of state-sponsored experimentation didn't end in Alabama. In Staten Island, New York, the Willowbrook State School became the site of another dark chapter in medical history. In the 1950s and 60s, Dr. Saul Krugman began a series of experiments on children with intellectual disabilities. To study the spread of hepatitis, Krugman and his team intentionally infected newly admitted children with the virus. They argued that because the school was so overcrowded and unsanitary, the children would have caught it anyway, so why not study it? Parents were often coerced into signing consent forms as a condition for their child's admission to the facility. It was a cold, clinical exploitation of the most vulnerable members of society. The truth only reached the public through the work of a young reporter named Geraldo Rivera, who used a stolen key to enter the facility in 1972. The footage he captured showed children neglected, naked, and living in filth. It wasn't just a failure of care. It was a failure of humanity. These revelations, combined with the Tuskegee scandal, forced a total overhaul of how research is conducted. But the question remains, what other secrets are still hidden in the archives of our institutions? The cost of these silences was measured in thousands of lives and a fractured public trust. However, out of these scandals came the foundations of the protections we have today. The National Research Act of 1974 was signed into law specifically because of the outcry over Tuskegee and Willowbrook. It created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects, leading to the Belmont Report and the establishment of institutional review boards. Today, any scientific study involving humans must undergo rigorous ethical scrutiny. Likewise, consumer protection laws have become much more robust in the wake of corporate cover-ups. We now have a framework that, in theory, protects the individual from the power of the institution. But we must remember that these laws weren't granted voluntarily. They were won by whistleblowers, journalists, and activists who refused to stay quiet. The history of these cover-ups teaches us a vital lesson. Transparency is not a natural state of power. It is something that must be constantly demanded. After all, the hidden layer of history is only revealed when someone is brave enough to turn on the light. But are we vigilant enough to keep it on? History shows us that the truth is often hidden, but it is rarely erased. From the light bulbs of Geneva to the medical wards of New York, accountability only arrived when people looked closer. Thank you for joining us in uncovering these hidden layers of our past. If you value this kind of historical discovery, please subscribe and share this video. The best way to prevent future cover-ups is an informed public. What other secrets are waiting to be found?